Okay. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to say hello and welcome to my first ever virtual town hall. So I am a little bit new to this Zoom process, so hopefully we have everything under control. Luckily, I've got a great team with me, and they are handling the technical aspects. So if anybody has any problems, please just send a message, and we'll do the best we can to fix things, okay? So just to introduce myself again, I'm Pat Nikolai. I'm the newly elected Chief of Police. And just to go over the ground rules for this, I really appreciate you all being here in this. And so we're going to talk about a bunch of different issues. And one of the main topics, of course, is going to be use of force and racial injustice. So we're going to cover those topics thoroughly. So there's a question and answer feature in the Zoom, and it's at the bottom right there. So if you have a question, go ahead and type that in, and we will try to get to all the questions and answers as we go along. And spoiler alert, if your question regards the 8 can't wait, don't bother, because we're going to cover that thoroughly, okay? If we run out of time and I don't get to all the questions, then I'm going to encourage you to email the question in. And our email address is police@santaclaraca.gov. So please send a response if we don't get to your question today. Okay. Let's see. Remember, this is a public forum, and we all have different opinions, but let's keep things courteous and professional, all right? And again, we'll go over the ground rules a little bit more in the future. So just to start with, let me tell you a little bit about myself, if you don't know me already. So I've been at the Santa Clara Police Department for 29 years. I started obviously as an officer, and one of the first things I did when I started working here is I moved into the city. So I've been a city resident for the same amount of time. And I really enjoy living in the community that I'm protecting. It really makes me feel like I'm part of this community. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing this job, is because we get to take care of my neighbors. And so when I go around walking my neighborhood, it's nice to see people, and they say hi, and we get a lot of good feedback that way about our department. So I'm really excited about that. So in my career, I've worked every division. I've worked in investigations. I've worked in services. I've worked in community services. And it's given me a very well-rounded career, so that I pretty much know every aspect of the department, and basically how to do any kind of investigation and what we need to be successful moving forward. So another thing is I live actually in the Old Quad area. So my wife and I will often walk through the Old Quad and walk through the university. And again, like just meeting people and saying hello. So if you see us walking around, please say hi. Let's see, we have 4 kids, and our youngest is actually just finishing up college this year, and she's going to be graduating from UC Santa Cruz. And it's a little disappointing under all this COVID time, because she's not able to, have a formal graduation. And I think a lot of us are experiencing that. I know I did when I had my swearing in ceremony. It was under social distancing guidelines, so it was a little bit different than I pictured it. But I think we're all in the same boat, so we're all going to be, going through this together. So when I first came up with the plan for a town hall, we had a pretty different agenda than what we're looking at right now. So, when we first set this up, it was before COVID started, and we were talking about all the new programs and things that we were going to start. All of a sudden, COVID hit, and we were obviously placed on lockdown, just like everybody else, and we had to make several adjustments. So here at the department, we've been doing a lot of things to make sure that our officers are safe and that the people that we come into contact with are safe. So we're, using full PPE gear on calls. We sanitize all of our department interior. We sanitize our cars. We actually purchased a machine. It's very interesting. It's an ozone generator, so that all of our cars are sanitized, and we're going to use that basically moving forward for every time we transport someone, so that nobody's going to get sick. So we had a lot of big changes for COVID, but we also still had a lot of projects that I wanted to talk about. So my first town hall, the initial stuff was to talk about, what we were doing to do auto burglary suppression, some of the plans we had in place for that, some of the new technology that was coming online, things like the new records management system, some of the new legislation, a lot of the programs that have been started in the past, and I wanted to keep moving forward with things like coffee with a cop, chat with a chief, the neighborhood watch program. All these things obviously have been put on hold, and we're hopeful that they're going to come back sooner rather than later. As soon as the health orders allow it and we can have face-to-face contact again, we will start doing those things again. Another thing we had to stop was our Citizens Police Academy. That had to be put on hold during this crisis. So again, that's another avenue where we can have some good communication and some good dialogue. So the communication dialogue is, I think, one of the most important aspects of my job, in that I need to get the message out to the public on what we do here in the police department. And it's my privilege to be the police chief here, and I take that honor seriously. And my goal is to ensure that our officers do the best job that they can, and that our officers are the best trained officers in the state or the nation, and that when they do their job, they do it right, and that you as the citizens will see that on a daily basis. I think we've got a great track record here at Santa Clara Police Department, and I think we've built up a fairly significant amount of trust. And I think moving forward, we need to reinforce that trust, especially, and this is in light of what happened in Minneapolis. So we all saw the murder of George Floyd, and we all saw the riots and the destruction that happened, after that, and the protests. And so we need to look at our department, and we need to decide, can we do something better? And there was a lot of input that we received from the community on things that we should do. And like I said earlier, one of the items that was put forward was a website called 8 Can't Wait. And it listed 8 things that a department should do in order to reduce the chances of unnecessary violence. And what I wanted to do was kind of go over those points right now, because when you look at it, our current use of force policy actually covers nearly every point that is raised by that website. And that's where I mentioned communication. I think once people learn what our policies are and how we actually do our job, they are going to understand that we do follow the recommendations that are on different platforms. So when you look at the 8 Can't Wait, one of the and I'll just go through all 8. I'll go through all 8 and compare them to our policy. Now, just to let you know, our use of force policy is online, and it's accessible to anyone. All of our policies are going to be online. We are currently transitioning from our old policy manual to a new policy manual based on Lexipol. And this has been an ongoing process that's taken a fairly lengthy amount of time. So some of the policies that you'll see online are Lexipol policies, and some of the policies you're going to see are old policies that we haven't updated into the new Lexipol system. But again, if you go to our website, you'll see the policies, and you're able to click on the link and actually pull it up. So when you look at our policy, you're going to see a lot of information. And let me just focus on the highlighted points that are brought through by the 8 Can't Wait. The first is de-escalation. It says that de-escalation should be required. Well, de-escalation is a very important part of our use of force policy, and it's mandated. And every situation that an officer gets to, their goal is to de-escalate a situation so that they have to use no force. An officer does not want to use force, and that might be a common misconception that officers are looking for a fight, and that's not true. We want to settle the situation as easily as possible with the minimal, if any, use of force. So one of the things that we can do as a department is increase our training. And one of the classes that's available, it's called CIT. It's called Crisis Intervention Training. And we actually put all of our officers through Crisis Intervention Training, CIT training. In addition, there is a 40-hour post-approved course on CIT. And we've actually put, I believe it's 44% of our officers through that training. And our goal is to keep putting officers through that training so that all of our officers will actually get the 40-hour training. So that's the de-escalation requirement. The second one is require a warning before shooting. And again, that is in our policy. Our policy specifically states that when it's feasible, an officer should identify themselves as an officer, and they should say that they are going to use force, and deadly force specifically. So we do already meet that requirement. Another requirement is called duty to intervene. And what that is referring to is if an officer sees another officer doing something illegal, specifically excessive force. And again, that is in our policy. You have to report any time you see something that could be excessive force. So that is already mandated. Okay. Another aspect is require comprehensive reporting. Again, anytime there's a use of force incident, our officers are obligated to make a report. So that's already in place. And we actually go a step farther. So for instance, if an officer displays a taser and doesn't use it, but just displays it and says, I'm going to use this if you don't comply, and then the person complies, we will actually document that in a use of force report to show that just the threat of force was being used. So we do have that comprehensive reporting requirement already in place. The next one is ban chokeholds and strangulations. And I think there's a misconception there, and that's specifically in regards to a technique called the carotid restraint. So there has never been chokeholds or strangulation allowed ever since I've been in the department. I don't think it's ever been allowed. So there is no allowable time when someone could strangle someone or choke them. Now, there is a maneuver in place in our training that is called the carotid restraint. And when you do a carotid restraint, it actually does go around the neck, but what the officer does is puts pressure here on the sides of the neck. And what that does is that cuts off blood flow to the brain and renders the person incapacitated, where they can then be handcuffed, and then the person will come to very quickly. What's very interesting about this technique is we train for this every year, and we train on each other so you can actually feel what it's like to have this this pressure put on you. And it's pretty significant, where if you don't let the partner know that you can feel the pressure, you'll start to feel woozy and start to lose consciousness. Now, because of the incident that happened in Minneapolis, the carotid restraint is coming under increased scrutiny. And what the governor recently did is he instructed POST, and POST is the Police Officer Standards and Training that organizes all of the training and sets the standards for law enforcement in the state. So what the governor said is he told the POST to decertify all training in the carotid restraint. So post will no longer be instructing that. So what we're going to do then is we've immediately changed our policies so that the carotid restraint could only be used in the event of a situation where deadly force would be appropriate. So it's a tool, but we've limited it to only the most serious situations. And again, we're waiting to see what happens through the legislation, because we believe that this will actually probably be legislated out. So it will be banned completely in some form. So we're waiting to see what's going to come out of that. But to go back to the original 8 can't wait point, there is no strangulations or chokeholds. Okay. The next one is that there should be a ban against shooting at moving vehicles. And again, this is another situation where we only allow shooting at a moving vehicle in a life or death situation. And a perfect example would be an incident where someone was using a vehicle as a weapon. And we've seen incidents like this in Europe where people have taken vehicles and driven them into crowded street fairs, things like that. So in the event of a situation like that, you would have to shoot at a moving vehicle. So to prohibit it at all times just wouldn't be, I don't think, realistic, especially in a life or death situation like that. The next is the requirement of a use of force continuum. Now, a use of force continuum it's actually rather outdated. And what it is it's basically a ladder. And what it means is you start at the lowest level of force, such as command presence, and then you increase to, control holds, and then maybe you would increase to OC spray, and then a baton, all the way up to the use of deadly force. Now, the problem with the continuum is that a lot of times they will require you to, go through all these steps to get to where you need to be. So the problem is you don't want to have to worry about going through all the steps depending on the situation. And the perfect example is if someone approached an officer with a handgun and pointed a handgun at them, then again, obviously an officer would not want to go through an entire use of force continuum. They would go immediately to the most appropriate use of force, which would of course be their own weapon. So what we do is we have what's called a toolbox. And so all of our force options are in a toolbox, and the officer has to use the appropriate force for each situation. Okay? And then the final requirement or recommendation from the 8 can't wait is that requires exhaust all alternatives before shooting. Now, as you know, our use of force policy was recently, the state law was recently changed by Assembly Bill 392, that changed our use of force policy, which required us to, and Lexipol, to update our policies immediately. So we have the current policy, and let me just actually read this one section to you, because I think this really sums up what our use of force policy boils down to. And it says, officers shall use only that amount of force that reasonably appears necessary given the facts and totality of the circumstances known to or perceived by the officer at the time of the event to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement purpose. So I read that verbatim because I really think it's important that people understand we only use the amount of force that's necessary to overcome the resistance or affect the arrest, and that's key. So the use of deadly force, again, is limited to only very few situations, and that includes to protect your life, to protect the life of another citizen, or to apprehend someone that has done something so horrific, so violent, and they are going to do it again. An example of that would be if a shooter active shooter was engaged with officers and then was running away and running towards a school, then officers would be justified in using deadly force in that situation. Okay, so that's kind of all the points that the 8 Can't Wait organization is advocating for, and I hope that I've been able to show that our use of force policy is practically a mirror of everything that they are requiring or they are recommending. So I think it's a good base for us to start, and I think it's important because we need to move forward. We need to see if there's something we can do to improve things. And I think the communication of knowing that we are in a very good place to start with, but at the same time, we also realize that things can get better. So, a couple other things that I wanted to go over about use of force too, just a little bit of information. So based on last year's statistics, we responded to nearly 62,000 calls for service during the year. And during those 62,000 calls for service, there were only 100 uses of force. So for the math wizards out there, it's a 0.16%. So the use of force is very rarely done. Now, unfortunately, in situations like Minnesota, it's the excessive force and it's completely inappropriate. And that's what is driving this dialogue at this point. But I want to make sure that you realize that here in Santa Clara, we do not use force very much at all. I mean, let 0.16%. When you look at what kind of force we used during the year, the majority of the times it was just taking someone to the ground. So if someone was actively resisting and they were taken to the ground to be handcuffed, that's nearly half of our uses of force. And then another use of force that is the majority is a restraint device. And we have a device that's called the wrap. And it basically immobilizes a person's feet and legs, puts them in a seated position, and then they're unable to hurt others or themselves. So those are the majority of our use of force calls. Another, what's very interesting is we don't fire our handguns very much. Just last year, there was one incident where a handgun was fired, and it did result in a fatality, and that was the active shooter at the Rotten Robbie up on Lafayette, if you remember that incident. But if you go back over the last 10 years, it's a handful of incidents that an officer actually had to use as their gun. Now, one of the other things that I think we need to do better with is with our fair and impartial policing. So one of the trainings that we have had in the past is on fair and impartial policing and on implicit bias. And what that basically means is everybody has a bias. Not saying that everybody is racist, but everybody has biases based on their histories. And as officers, it's important for us to realize that we have these so that when we do reach out and speak to people, we're always constantly having in the back of our mind that, hey, we need to make sure that we're treating this person with respect and dignity as each situation requires. And that anything that we have in the back of our mind, we need to make sure that we don't let that influence our decisions. So we've had a lot of training on this, and I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about training that we get. So there's mandated post-training. So we have training that occurs every year. We have 4 AOT days. It's called Advanced Officer Training Days. So every sworn officer gets 4 full days of training. In addition, we have 4 days we call Special Enforcement Days that we've been working in training as well. So that's an additional 4 hours of training. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to make sure that our officers are the best trained. And by that, I mean, we don't do just the minimum. We go above and beyond. And I think, For example, some of the training that we've had that's not post-required is the bias, the racial profiling class that I talked about, the use of force with mental health issues, tactical communication, dealing with mentally ill individuals, and again, the critical incident response, how to respond to critical incidents. So, what's important to know is, again, we've had a lot of training in dealing with a variety of incidents. And I think that's one of the things that I think people also need to realize is that our officers respond to every type of call you can think of. And it's not just traditional, my house is being broken into or the bank is being robbed. It is every call that you can think of. It is responding to the complaints regarding a homeless person in front of a store, or involving a call involving a mentally disturbed person who is threatening their neighbors, someone who is threatening to commit suicide. So we have to be trained in so many different aspects so that we can handle all the different calls. And I think one of the issues that's been brought to the forefront is the idea of defunding the police department. And what I think the conversation should not be about defunding the police departments, because I think when you look at the police department's budgets, we are already stretched thin. We are doing more with less, and especially with the situation with COVID, how it's affected the budget for the city. I think, again, we're going to be having to do more with less. But what I think we need to do is we need to get the state legislator to provide additional funds, and those additional funds could be used to provide additional resources that we could use to solve problems that aren't necessarily law enforcement related problems. One of the things we're trying to do here at the police department is actually bring in a mental health clinician to work directly in our department to help with all the mental health related calls. And this is a kind of an interesting side note. We've actually been trying to hire a person for over a year, and we aren't able to find anybody because there are so many people trying to hire mental health clinicians right now. So not only is the county health system, the large private health facilities like Kaiser, but also all the high-tech companies, they are hiring mental health professionals for their, employees. So we're trying to fight to find someone to come work for us, because we think we can do an even better job handling, mental health issue calls with someone who's specifically trained for that issue. Some of the other questions that we've had prior to this are in regards to cameras. Do we have cameras? And yes, we do. We have body-worn cameras, and we've had them for years. Every officer wears one, and anytime they are contacting someone or doing anything police-related, their camera is turned on. And we found that this is a great resource for us. It enables us to go back and look at incidents and see if there's anything we need to improve on, or if the officer did everything right. And that kind of goes to officer complaints. So we get people that call into the department either to commend an officer or to file a complaint against an officer. And one of the first things we do is we let the supervisor review the body camera, because a lot of times issues will be cleared up. And and again, I go back to my mantra, it's all about communication. So a lot of times, once we communicate what the issue was, why a person was stopped, what they did, what the officer perceived, then the complainant is satisfied and it's resolved. So what we're really trying to do is make sure that we have excellent communication throughout a department. So I encourage you, if you are stopped or you think you see something that's inappropriate, reach out to that officer. If you're not comfortable reaching out to that officer, reach out to the watch commander who's working that night. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can send an email in either to the generic police department, or you can contact our internal affairs unit. We investigate every complaint that comes into the department. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that our officers are doing it right. And I think, again, our track record shows that we do a very good job. And one of the other things we do is we reached out to the community, and we reached out to the community to basically see what kind of job are we doing. So we partnered with this group. Their name was My90, and they did a bunch of research for us. They contacted individuals, did surveys, and we found out that we did have a very good reputation in the city. And one of the things they requested, or they recommended, was that we get more input from the community. So my predecessor, he actually formed the Chiefs Advisory Committee. And it's a group of people, just a wide range of people from the city, who are all interested in volunteering and helping with our policies and helping with different equipment that we're bringing on. A perfect example is our drones. So we're going to be starting a drone program soon. So one of the first things we did is we ran this by the Citizens Advisory Committee, and we asked them, what do you think about this? And once we explained what we wanted to do and how we wanted to use them, they were extremely supportive. So we're moving forward. We've actually purchased the drones. Again, because of COVID, everything is delayed. But we want to move to a model where we can actually have, tools that will help us better serve the community, and that's one of them. So that's a perfect example. Now, the Chiefs Advisory Committee, it was originally set for a 2-year term, and then we were going to start turning over the group, so we'd have new members all the time. Again, because of COVID, we had to cancel several meetings. So the current group is going to go for 1 more year, and then we are going to switch over and have half of the group stay and bring in a new set of people. So when we do announce that, please, I encourage anyone that's interested and wants to be part of the the communication to put in for that. Okay. So what are we doing moving forward? So I recently did a small video with Mayor Gilmore, and it's a little 2-minute video. And if you have a chance, if you haven't seen it yet, it's on the city YouTube channel, and it's basically a commitment to action. So what the mayor did is she signed President Obama's pledge to look at our policies, and I agreed with her that we should take a look at all of our policies and see what we can do to do better. So we're going to review our policies. We're going to look at not just our use of force policies, but all of them that could be improved. Because even though we're doing a great job, I'm sure we could do some things better. And that's one of the things we're going to look for is some community input. So one of the very first things that we're doing is we're having this virtual town hall. So we received a bunch of questions, and I've tried to answer them throughout. And I'm sure we have some more questions coming in, so I'll go through and try to answer some of those questions as well. But if, again, there's more communication, I encourage you to send us an email. And again, let me repeat it. Our email address is police@santaclaraca.gov, and that's all one word. So, okay. So what we're doing is we are doing our use of force. Like I said, we're going to review all of our policies. We're engaging the community, and this is the first step. And then we're going to report back to our community and see what kind of changes we need to make. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation at the upcoming city council meeting on June 23rd. And that's where we're going to be talking about some of the outreach we've already done and some of the processes that we may be looking to change. And, I've been trying to make myself available to anybody that wants to talk. For example, I recently had another Zoom meeting, and this was with the Black student group, the Iguaque. I hope I pronounced that correctly. over at Santa Clara University, and they had some concerns, and I was able to have a very good conversation with them. And I think we came across, we came together to realize that we're all on the same page. We want to make sure that we're all doing the best job that we can. And one of the things I did was I recommended that one of the new members, who's going to be the president next year, come on our ride along. And I think when they come to see what we do as an officer, I think that's going to help. So it's kind of where all the things that I wanted to cover. And I think we have a bunch of questions. So I know I've been talking for quite a while, so I'm going to go to some questions, and let's see if we can we look at some of these. Okay. So let's see. One of the first questions was, can you describe how Santa Clara Police Department responds when somebody calls the police with concerns about somebody who is homeless? Is there any kind of assistance to offer? Well, we have a unit called the Community Response Team, and our Community Response Team handles these types of calls because the majority of times it's not a crime. It's a quality of a life call that we get. So it could be that the person is panhandling in front of a store, or it could be that just someone is camped out in Central Park. And what we do is we will respond there, not to enforce the law, but to help educate the person. There are a myriad of resources available for homeless people in this county, and a lot of times people just don't realize what's available. So when we contact them with the idea of helping them, getting them in touch with some of these resources, and providing them the opportunity to, hopefully get out of the situation they're in. So that's really, when we respond to homeless calls, that's our mindset. Now, if it's a situation where, again, someone is maybe aggressively panhandling or assaultive, well, then we're going to handle that like we would any other case. But if it's simply a call where someone is homeless, then we're going to try to handle that with compassion and understanding, and see if we can get them the help they need. Okay. Next question is, what is your opinion about police uniforms? It seems that the all-black stormtrooper uniform is not necessarily conducive to community relations or interactions. Well, I'm going to have to disagree. I truly like my police uniform, and I really think it's a symbol. And I think it's not the uniform that's the problem. It's some of the people that are in the uniform. And I think if you could put someone who is a cop that should not be a cop, a bad cop, into whatever kind of outfit, they would still be a bad cop. So I think the uniform is a great message to send to people, where you know that, hey, that person is a police officer. That is someone you can go to for help. One of the things I really liked doing was going to schools, and actually going to like kindergarten, first grade classes, and talking to kids. And kids really like the uniform, and they really open up to it. And I point to the badge, and they all understand that's a symbol, and that means that's someone that you can go to for help. And so I really think that the uniform is not what the problem is. I think it's some of the people that are in the uniform, and I think it's our job to make sure that those people are not police officers. Okay, so the next question is, what kinds of crimes have increased, what has decreased, and what are your biggest concerns? So the one thing that happened with COVID is our calls for service really dropped, and almost every crime dropped in numbers. However, as the lockdown continued, we did start to see an increase in domestic violence calls. And that's really one of my biggest concerns, is domestic violence victims and child abuse victims being unable to reach for help. And I think that's probably my biggest concern, is making sure that as officers, we need to be out there in the community, just driving through neighborhoods, being visible, so that if someone does need help, if they're unable to call for whatever reason, maybe they can flag one of us down. The other thing that I think is important is, as a community here in Santa Clara, we need to watch out for one another. And by that I mean, we'll have situations where, neighbors are calling because of a person is walking their dog without a mask on, and they think that's a violation of the health order. And I think that, if someone is willing to call for something like that, then I think they should be willing to call if they hear a neighbor being abused or if they suspect someone is being abused. So I really, want to emphasize the fact that police work is not just the police, it's the community as well. We need to all be in this together, and we need to take care of one another. Okay, let's see. Next question. So, is it true that the union protects police officers from prosecution if involved with police brutality? If so, what is your stance on that? Will unions be considering how to handle the consequences of any police officers who commit egregious actions against citizens? So I think there's a misconception on what the union is for. The union is not there to protect bad cops. They are not there to impede justice. All the union is there to do is just to ensure that any discipline is done fair and through a judicious process. It's very similar to a court of law. There's rules, there's lots of rules on how to prosecute someone and what needs to be done to successfully convict someone. So the same thing happens in the law enforcement facility. There are rules that we as management need to follow. Now, would the union insist that we follow the rules? Yes, they would. And I don't fault them for that. That's what their job is. I think it's our job as police management and my job as chief to make sure that we follow all the rules, so that if there is a police officer that commits egregious violation, like the question says, that officer is held accountable. And I will make sure that the process is done thoroughly and correctly so that the situation can be resolved. And I had a question, another question, a very similar one, talking about discipline and, do unions protect officers from being disciplined? And again, no. All the unions will do is they will make sure that the steps are taken so that the discipline is imposed correctly. And so it's just like prosecuting a criminal case. You have steps to take, and our job as management is to make sure that we do follow those steps. Okay, so let's see. Please address how the use of force is documented, retained, and reported. Specifically, what systems are used to ensure document retention and reporting? So all of our reports are kept. We have a records management system. So all our reports are kept, and they're kept in soft copy, electronic copy, I'm sorry. So what we do with our use of force reports is we have a separate system that we keep track of. And what we do is we put all of our uses of force into the system. And we're actually using a system right now that is a little outdated. So we are actually in the process of working to get a new system that's going to be much more user-friendly and much more able for us to, get data out that's accurate and correct. And what I mean by that is we want to track all the use of force to see, is there an issue? Now, not necessarily is it an issue with a specific officer, but that could be the case. If you have an officer that has multiple allegations of use of force or multiple complaints against them, and then we look at their reports and they have an excessive number of force reports, then that's something we need to investigate and figure out what's going on. But another important aspect is a training issue. If we have a situation where force is being used and it's being used by different officers, but it's all the same incident, then maybe there's something we need to do in our training program to ensure that that doesn't happen, and to see if there's something that we can do to better train our officers to handle a specific situation. So that's how we do track it, and that's what we use that information for, again, to make ourselves better. Okay, let me see here. Okay, question is, what is the current demographic breakdown of Santa Clara Police Department? So that's a question. We actually have all the information, and let me scroll up real quickly. So, so our current demographics are based. So the city of Santa Clara, it's based off the last census because we're currently in the census right now, and so when you look at the city of Santa Clara and compare it to our department. So for the city itself, the numbers break down for the white is 43%, black is 2.9%, American Indian or Alaska Native 0.3%, Asian 41%, Hispanic or Latino 17%, and two or more races 5%. I'm kind of rounding numbers, just so you know. So here at the department, we have a very similar breakdown. Our 63% white, 1.4% black, 10% Asian, 19% Hispanic, and 5% with two or more races. So we're a pretty diverse department, and we're always looking to increase our diversity, because not only does it help us, in the community, but it gives us a new perspective when we're dealing with different ethnic backgrounds. And so what I really want to stress about our hiring is that we only hire the best here in our department. And just for a sense of the numbers we have, for every 100 applicants, we only select one officer or one recruit or one lateral. So we're very strict on who we bring into the department, and we really want the best. So we go out and we try to get the best candidates possible. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to reach out to underrepresented communities and encourage them to become police officers. And there's some times where there are cultural issues where they don't trust the police, and so a lot of foreign countries, they have a distrust of the police. So one of the things we have to overcome is that distrust and encourage people to come work for us. That's where things like the ride along and the CPA and the chat with the chief, all those programs are great because they help break down those misconceptions, and people can realize that we're just people like everybody else. So that's kind of our breakdown of our department. Someone asked, can I comment on the black ribbon across the badge? So if you can see here, I have a black mourning band, and that is for Sergeant Gutzweiler from Santa Cruz County Sheriff. He was killed in an ambush just a few days ago over the hill in Santa Cruz. And it's a tragedy. He had a wife with a small child, and she is actually 9 months pregnant, actually going to give birth within a couple of weeks. It's a horrific situation, and that's it's traumatic, especially for that department, but it's also traumatic for all members of law enforcement, because what you realize is that that sergeant was killed just because he was a police officer. He was targeted because he was a police officer, and that's extremely disappointing. So here at Santa Clara, what we did is we have several lateral officers that came from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office and from the Santa Clara Police Department. So we immediately contacted our peer support unit, made sure that everybody was doing okay. When they had a vigil, we sent officers to anybody that wanted to go could go to the vigil. And then to help out their department, we actually sent a group of officers to work their graveyard shift on one of the nights after the incident, so that their entire department could be off and have some time to grieve and to go process what happened. So that officer's funeral is going to be next week, and I anticipate that we will have a large contingent of people attending, and it's a tragic situation, and I hope you keep them and your family in your thoughts. I believe there was a GoFundMe page that was created. If you're interested in donating to them, to the family, I'm sure it would be much appreciated. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, so we're going to go to a few more questions. I'm going to try to wrap this up by 8. Let's see. Okay, let me read the question here. With what level of anonymity do you handle complaints, concerns about officers? Is there any independent review of complaints and or use of force by people who are outside of the police department? So if someone wants to make an anonymous complaint, they can, and we will investigate it. Now, it's a little bit harder when it's anonymous because it's sometimes it's hard to get the details of what the complaint is or get the viewpoint from that person. But we will take an anonymous complaint and we will investigate it and resolve it just like it was a complaint by a known person. Another thing that we can do is internally, we will also generate complaints. If we learn something that an officer did that maybe a citizen didn't complain about, but we know that it was inappropriate, we will generate an internal complaint. Now, review by an outside a group, that would be during an officer-involved shooting. So if there's an officer-involved shooting, a deadly force situation, then the district attorney's office will actually review the incident and make a finding on whether or not the officers acted appropriately or not. So there is a review outside of the department on those types of situations. Okay, here's a question. Will you pledge to run background checks during hiring and not hire anyone with excessive force complaints on their record? As I stated earlier, we are extremely thorough with our hiring process and very picky. So when someone comes through, we do a full background check. So we will contact, let's say it's a lateral officer, we will contact that agency and we will look for prior uses of force complaints. We will look for prior IAs, and those will generally disqualify an applicant. In addition, we also have a polygraph that our applicants go through and a psychological profile a psychological test that they have to do to see if they'd be qualified. And we think that those types of tests, they would help if someone was, extremely biased against some group or wanted to, be an officer for all the wrong reasons because they wanted to, have power over others or things like that. So those are not the types of people we want here at Santa Clara Police Department. And again, our standards are so high that I don't think we will get someone like that. And again, does that mean that we just rest on our laurels because we have such a thorough process? No. We are constantly training ourselves. We are constantly doing additional training above and beyond what is required. And again, we will generate internal affairs complaints against ourselves if we see that there's a problem, something that we need to handle. Okay. So there was a question here. It was, you were the president of the Santa Clara POA when the letter to the 49ers was drafted demanding that they discipline Kaepernick for speaking out. Do you retract those statements? I actually was asked this question by a reporter recently, and I sent him a statement. And just clarified with him that, first of all, when the letter was out, I had actually taken a leave of absence from the job as president because I was running for chief of police back in 2016, if anybody remembers that. And so I was not the president, but I was aware of the letter. But what I told the reporter is I was fully supportive of Mr. Kaepernick's right to protest and to peacefully protest and to kneel during the national anthem. What I didn't approve of was comments that he made specifically related to officers' trainings. He made some disparaging comments about the level of training that police officers obtained, and those were completely inaccurate. And so I still do not agree with those. But the protest, the bottom line, I support that 100%, and I would be there to protect his right to protest. We've had a couple of protests here in Santa Clara and we have some more scheduled. And the way we are looking at the protests is it's people's right to protest, and we are going to work with them to make sure that they are safe and that there is no violence and there is no any kind of illegal behavior. And we think that by having these good open dialogues and relationships with people, it's going to help us move forward. Let's see here. Another question is, how do you think Santa Clara Police Department differs from neighboring city police departments? So what I think the bottom line is, I'm proud to be the chief here at Santa Clara Police Department. I think we have a great department. I think we have one of the best departments in the state. I think we have some of the finest trained officers. And I think we are the bar that other agencies should aspire to reach. I remember when I started working here that the DA's office always commented on the level of the quality of reports that came from Santa Clara Police Department. And to this day, we still maintain that level. So I think that's one of the things that we have is we have a good, strong department that does the job right. The other thing that I really think is important is that I think, again, we're part of this community. I think we do a lot to ensure that we are members of the community through different outreach programs and through the things like Chat with the Chief, the Neighborhood Watch program that we're going to start up again as soon as we can get out of this COVID thing. So I think that's really one of the things is that we have very good relationships with the residents of Santa Clara. And I think it's best exemplified by our lateral officers. We have lateral officers that will come from different departments throughout the state, and some departments do not have a good relationship with their city. And when they come here, they are shocked, and they are shocked in a good way, because when officers go to coffee or go to a meal, they're flagged down and they are thanked for their service. And that's something that I'm extremely happy about, because we must be doing something right if people want to thank us. So I see that we're almost out of time, and I understand that there's over 100 questions that were submitted for this, and I was obviously only able to get to a fraction of them. So we're going to go through those questions, and we will get responses out. The last thing I wanted to point out is that a lot of the information that I gave today on the use of force and the things, they're going to be on a new webpage. And this new webpage is under construction, and I'm hoping that by early next week, maybe Monday, it's going to be live. And so when you go to the city website, santaclaraca.gov, and you pull up the police department, the very first page you're going to see is going to be titled Commitment to Action. And a lot of the information that I talked about today is going to be on that, and it's going to be accessible online. And I think, once again, my mantra is communication. And I think once people see what we are doing to make things better here in Santa Clara, it's only going to improve our relationships. So again, if I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. This was our first virtual town hall, and I'm hoping that it went well. I'm hoping that you were able to take something from this. So please give me some feedback. Give us some feedback if there's something that we would like to do again. I would happily do this again, at least until we can meet face to face. So, finally, again, if you have any questions or comments, send us an email. It's police@santaclaraca.gov. And again, go to our website and take a look. And again, starting next week, pull up our page. It's going to be Commitment to Action, and it's going to kind of show you everything that we have right now. Okay? So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to spend a little bit of time with me. I hope I was able to be informative. And again, if we want to, and if you want to, we will definitely do this again. Okay? So thank you very much, and have a good night.